Who best to get some clarity on this than Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us out of Bristol. Tony, it's good to see you. As always, like deja vu with this Brexit saga. Last minute talks, deal or no deal. Will London clinch a trade deal with Brussels?
Stages. It's like a divorce deal. You know, first of all, the couple are arguing. Then they agree, yes, they are going to have to separate, they're going to have to leave each other, and then all the trading starts, and then finally the actual leaving takes place. But then, of course, there's also the aftermath. You know, in a marriage, it's what happens to the children and that sort of thing. But we haven't got that yet, but we're really at the final stage of the basic legal separation, which is coming up on the 31st of December. But I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm sure to some of your viewers I will sound like I'm exaggerating. Brexit is a great cataclysm order. It was never supposed to happen, and the idea of a United States of Europe was in the hearts of the oligarchy. They believed that they got it, that they were in control, and thankfully the British people in 2016 put a spanner in the works. And so the main point to take home from these negotiations going on this November and December, we're speaking in 2020, in the background of the pandemic that has been happening for most of the world for most of the year, is that Brussels absolutely want to punish Britain as much as possible in this deal. So the British, I'm afraid, have not got many chips on the table. They're basically trying to trade with people who want to give them the worst deal possible.
It's not got any table, Tony. There is a lot of fish going around. Did you think that those who voted to leave the EU back in June 2016, some of them for immigration reasons, to put it kindly, had any idea at the time that on New Year's Eve 2021 the two sides are fighting over fishing rights?
Well, you're right. Fishing was always going to be a big one because of Britain being such an important naval power up until the time of the Second World War, and up until the official deal started back in 1975 with what was then the European Economic Community. Nobody asked anybody in Europe if they wanted to make it a political union. Actually, there were a couple of referenda, like one in Ireland, and when they got it wrong, the Irish were asked to vote again and again until they got it right. So this was always actually a political project. But on your main point there about immigration, I think it's absolutely wrong to conclude that the British voted because they don't like immigrants and they had enough of immigration. This isn't really the case. The global organised crime, who are basically the main people behind the migrant boats across the Mediterranean and across the English Channel, are really being looked after by Brussels. And the British government have had very little success, mainly because they've been helped. This kind of immigration is designed to undermine the pay and the conditions that British workers have fought for hundreds of years, and actually mainly for about 100 years since the time of the First World War. You know, basically making sure they're getting decent pay and they can't be sacked at the drop of a hat, that they have basic union rights, this sort of thing, in order to make sure that employers cannot bully their employees. And the whole importation of literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cheap economic migrant labourers, I have nothing against those individuals. They're just looking for a better life. But what this was doing was deliberately undermining pay and conditions in Britain. For example, we have offered migration to people in Hong Kong. What you're getting from Hong Kong, as people start to come across to the UK, a very different type of individual. People who are very highly skilled, very highly paid in most cases, and also extremely highly motivated. I'm not saying that actually the economic migrants aren't highly motivated, but it's a very different type of migrant. And I think that there's been an attempt to smear the Brexiteers, who basically want to put an end to this mockery of democracy going on in Brussels, and actually to regain sovereignty, to smear them as racist and just anti-immigration. We're not. I mean, I'm one of them, and I can tell you most of the people I know are just fed up with having our laws made abroad, that when we vote in one of our British elections, we can't actually get rid of the people who are in charge. Yeah, that's the main reason for all of this. And on the Brexit negotiation front at the moment is that the standoff, well, I mean, it's going to go no deal, almost certainly. The British negotiators began talking about, let's have something like the Canada deal, thinking, well, you can't argue with that. That's a deal you've already negotiated with a similar country to Britain, and surely we can do that. But no, no, no. The EU negotiators don't even want us to have that sort of deal. They want to try and pressurise Britain into a Norway-Switzerland style deal, which is basically part of the European Free Trade Area, which would not mean that Britain gets its sovereignty back. It would mean that all of the trade disputes that take place into the future are ruled over by something called the European Court of Justice. That is to say, not by British, but by EU courts. So that is not sovereignty. And one does scratch one's head and ask, why are these otherwise very intelligent Swiss and Norwegians in that deal having a foreign court deciding what can and cannot be traded in their country? And the reason is because actually there are oligarchs right across these various countries that want to be able to treat them just as small provinces of one country. What they're trying to do is end the idea of the nation state in Europe, and they haven't asked a single person in Europe if they want to do that. And I'm very glad that the British are making things difficult for those in Brussels, because all of the other countries, including France and Germany, by the way, the individuals in those countries are looking very closely at what happens to Britain and as to whether we successfully leave on the 31st of December, because they're thinking of doing the same thing. That's why Brussels has to punish the British negotiators as much. And you know, if we were to stay in the European Free Trade Area, that would mean that Britain would have no say whatsoever in what was happening, because Switzerland and Norway don't send any MEPs or anybody or commissioners to run the European superstate in Brussels.
Right.
But they have to abide by those regulations that are put in place. So that's an absolute no-brainer. You don't be part of a club where you don't have any say in what the rules of the club are. So I think Britain has been quite plucky. This cataclysmic attack, really, on the New World Order is going to finish. Is going to finish, I think, on 31st of December. Let's just hope it takes place and actually puts a frightener on some of these people who think they rule the world from behind the scenes.
And the so-called left did join the so-called right during the campaign for Brexit over the sovereignty issue. Tony, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we have run out of time. Tony Gosling there, investigative journalist, joining us out of the British city of Bristol.